Well, hello again, K-Man. This is your host, Dr. Wilton George McDonald II, and this is GTR, Genesis, Timeline, and Roots, episode 16. In this episode, it is truly a remarkable one. We have 15 weeks covered, but in this one, we focus on our brand, Genesis. In this episode, we are discussing in God's image. What does it mean to be created in God's image? And for the viewers, for everyone, take you to the book of Genesis. And in Genesis chapter 1, we could see here, God said, let us create man in our image, after our likeness, the Godhead, God the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, over the cattle, the earth, every creeping thing. Verse 27, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. And no second female, no other being that they call. It was Adam and Eve, two perfectly created beings with the hand of God, circa 4000 BC, as Christian scholars have made the timeline. And then continuing that GTR spirit and timeline, we come full forward to, call it 2026. Because of the time change, we are 5,026 years roughly away from creation. So a lot of people avoid this subject. It's one of the most inconvenient subjects that's not spoken about. We have people discussing all aspects of creation and God and man, putting their theories like evolution, which we discussed before, which really is so incredulous and takes so much faith to even accept, because of the spurious timeline that goes for hundreds of thousands of years, not taking into account that we only had about 150 million to 200 million people around living at the time of Christ, roughly 1,000 years ago. So it is that we present this episode just to look at some of those topics and subtopics, the labels that people would give and assign to man, and they refer to as humans, or like, even mankind, but not really like mankind. We are indeed generally considered humans, but I like the original definitions and the terminology. It refers to mankind and man, just as man, not a kind of man, but God made man in his image, from the ground, from the natural color of earth. And if we just explore our known world, we know that that natural color is a rich, dark, chocolatey brown color. That's the color. Barring the minerals or the metals or the erosion that has taken place on the earth, that natural color of topsoil, even the place where I live, which is Poland, where that natural rich from the ground is that dark brown color, not from snow, but he made man. God made man in his image. So there are many others and scholars and theologians that want to tell you, well, please show me and tell me, what do you mean by in God's image? And the questions are asked. You have here one theologian, he will write, is God black? Is he black? Does God have a color? And they're very quick to point out it's the spiritual aspects, not the physical, that God is just so grand and beyond that physical, into the metaphysical and spiritual realm. They don't like to discuss color. Even I'm an Adventist, the Seventh-day Adventist, and Ellen White, again, this is just what the conventional theorists and theologians would say. The Bible does not provide. We're going to touch on that shortly, a physical description of Jesus. And we know that the Bible too has been redacted. It's not 66, never 66 books, but the Ethiopians embraced the full Bible, which is 100. And there are texts and Esdras and other books where material has been lifted and taken out, the apocryphal writings, not including the Book of Enoch. I have no value placed on the Book of Enoch, which was non-canonical, but the apocryphal writings and the other materials, there are many for Jubilee and books that even referred in our current canon that have been taken, lifted out. So it says that it would appear that he would have had dark hair and eyes, and he would have been looking like the people at the time. They always say, well, it's important that he would really look like, and we know the people that's currently residing in the Middle East, in whether Israel or Palestine, general MENA region, they are of a fair complexion. So we are going to just do that deep dive into these, labels that's been assigned. How do you describe God? And who is God? Well, if you look at other materials and books, I will point to even early writings. Now, in all her work, I would say that Ellen White, who is a co-founder of the Adventist Church, she never described Christ as far as I see it. And I have read pretty much all her books. I have studied her work, and there may be materials that's not released by the Ellen White estate. We don't know. We know that a lot of materials have been either destroyed or they are kept from the public. We know a lot of museums, called the Vatican, other things, not to delve in conspiracy theories, but to tell you that there are many examples where we know materials. I found one, the Moor's Quadrille, which is a painting I found in Dresden of 4 kings of Europe. That's not on public display. So Ellen White, she was a founder, and she was a prophetess. She was a leader in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and her image has been distorted. She has written many books. One of the latest books was really referring to Tales in Sunny Side, a place in Australia where she was exiled, having been vocal and speaking about fair treatment and equal treatment and human rights as regards to people of color. And she was sent packing to Australia by the church. And so she wrote that book on their Tales in Sunnyside in Australia. And guess what? I only found one portrait of Miss White. In her even books, in the front cover, you see different depictions of this woman at different nose sizes, different lip sizes, a different skin color. And I've uncovered and unearthed magazine and newspaper clippings, which I've shared even on Facebook, to show that Ellen White was of dark skin because she had a black mom from New Jersey. So in early writings, Ellen White was permitted to even see now, because we're discussing the nature of God. So I wanted to show in the only piece of work that's ever been descriptive of the other guy, of Satan. Now, I'm reading her words. I was shown Satan as he was once a happy, exalted angel. Then I was shown him as he now is. He still bears a kingly form. His features are still noble, for he is an angel fallen. But the expression of his countenance is full of anxiety, care, unhappiness, malice, hate, mischief, deceit, and every evil. That brow, which was once so noble, I particularly noticed. His forehead commenced from his eyes to recede. I saw that he had demeaned himself so long that every good quality was debased. Every evil trait was developed. His eyes were cunning, sly, and showed great penetration. His frame was large, but the flesh hung loosely about his hands and face. As I beheld him, his chin was resting upon his left hand. He appeared to be in deep thought. A smile was upon his countenance, which made me tremble. It was so full of evil, the satanic slyness. The smile is one he wears just before he makes sure of his victim, and as he fastens the victim in his snare, this smile grows horrible. So again, she was allowed and permitted to see the devil, Satan. Now, I just presented this because there are not many sources that will describe the other guy. There's good and evil. We have, the duality, yin yang, balance, God versus Satan. And so we are told In the Bible, there are passages, and I will touch on that he is melanated. And it makes sense because the ground is certainly dark brown, melanated. So God is, call it in a form that is melanated black. And the Satan, when you describe him as a form that would be, she bears no reference to color. But mind you, what it really suggests when you look at it, if you know, I've been around people, his flesh hung loosely about his frame. Now, I have, seen a lot of persons today who are melanated. And one thing with melanin and that collagen, the older folks will tell you, it keeps the body. It's firming. And you could find maybe in some older blacks, their bodies and frames will shrink. But what she's describing to me is someone who even would appear to be non-black, Caucasian. The flesh is hanging. The collagen, natural, elasticity in the skin. We know it today. Again, those who are middle-aged and older would know the face. It's firming without any cosmetic procedures. I mean, it's a wide sweeping generalization, but there is no color mentioned. So what is Satan? Why was he not allowed and invited to join the Godhead? He was created above the other angels. He was exalted, but he was not God. He was not God. And for that reason, we know sin entered the world. He wanted to be like God, and he was not allowed to join the Godhead. So belaboring the point, it just suggests to me, devil may be certainly non-black figure. And I'm going to touch on this shortly on why I feel this to be the case. So, no references of God? Well, there are references in the Bible, and I'm going to point to that shortly.
Was Jesus actually black? The evidence might shock you. Let's look at the facts. Jesus was born in the Middle East, in a region connected to Africa and populated by people of color. Revelation describes his hair as wool-like and his feet as bronze, burned in a furnace. These are clear descriptions of darker skin and afro-textured hair. Even ancient depictions from early Christianity in Ethiopia and Egypt portrayed Jesus with dark skin. So, why has Western art consistently shown him as white? Could this be a deliberate erasure of his true identity? The real question isn't just what Jesus looked like, but why his image has been whitewashed for centuries. What do you think? Was Jesus actually black? The evidence might shock you. Let's look at the facts. Jesus was born in the Middle East, in a region connected to Africa and populated by people of color. Revelation describes his hair as...
And I turned to see the voice that spake with me. And being turned, I saw 7 golden candlesticks. And in the midst of the 7, Revelation 1 and 12 through 15. And I turned to see the voice that spake with me. And being turned, I saw 7 golden candlesticks. And in the midst of the 7 candlesticks, one like unto the Son of Man, clothed with a garment down to the foot, and girt about the paps with a golden girdle. His head and his hairs were white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were as a flame of fire, and his feet like unto fine brass, as if they burned in a furnace, and his voice is the sound of many waters. Thank you for watching. Please comment amen if you liked the video. Have a wonderful day, and stay blessed.
So we have text in Revelation in the Bible that describes where God is described, and even Christ described as someone not from just the region where he was. Because when it comes to Romans and what Romans looked like, you can go to the Cardiff, Wales, to the Royal Castle, in the basement where I visited, and you could see black Romans. Romans were carved in rock. Their faces are still preserved. And I traveled to North Africa, Tunisia, Algeria, Carthage, Morocco, and I saw not faces preserved, but faces taken off. More than 3,000 images. And these were Roman occupied territories in North Africa. So again, their faces, if intact, would reveal the same thing as I saw in Cardiff, Wales. Those Roman soldiers, which had very large nose, large lips, black features, black men. And so Christ was a person who lived in those times, even without applying the math. How can you have 8 to 10% of whites today, non-Hispanics, and you think that you can go back and regress that, put it in any math model and regress it to find whites living in antiquity, in ancient times? It's not reasonable. It's not rational. It's not possible. And how can you explain the millions and millions and millions of fair-skinned people amongst us today in the Middle East? Because to make fair skin black cannot, it's impossible to extract black from a fair skinned person. White is recessive. Black is dominant. So you would have to have a proliferation. There would be more whites today had there not been a blended society, a mixing of races to create the Hispanics, to create the fair skin MENA. And today they're fighting in the Middle East over black land where you have Palestinians and Israelis. Neither group would be truly connected to the land, but they're still fighting. And they're not connected to biblical figures. They're not connected to the original mankind, people living even in the times of Christ. And so you have to really think about it. Ask yourself, again, created in the image of God, what is it really about? And I am, again, just so curious. Who are the Hebrews? Just who are? And I'm searching for truth. I'm searching for answers. And so Hebrews, historians consider the Hebrews as synonymous with Israelites, denoting an Israelite from a nomadic region, 11th century. But 11th century, when we are in the 11th century now. Well, this is 11th century BC. That, to me, boggles the mind, because 11th century, going back in time, you think about it. 1,000 years, BC 1000, Israel and Judea. Okay. The Exodus was around 1500. Shouldn't that be around 14th century at least? We know the time of David was about 1000 BC, 10th century BC. And then the Israelites, the Exodus from Egypt, just the 11th. So it says the kingdom of Israel and Judah in the 11th century BCE. And those were people who are connected. Are they connected? How can they be connected if they're just new to this earth, new to the planet? How can that be the case? By the time of the Roman Empire, we refer to the member of the Jewish people, but the Romans were black. I refer to Jewish Christians, Judaizers, Gentile Christians. Which one? For the Italian, Greek, Kurdish, Serbian, and the paintings. I have a problem. Here it is that you have fair-skinned paintings that's presented. Where are the black Hebrews? There is a deliberate erasure. There's a deliberate, I would say, confusion. They want to not clarify, but make it more opaque. They really want to, and use in Zionism. So in the 19th century, the term Hebrew became popular among secular Zionists. The word alluded to the transformation of the Jewish people into a strong, independent, self-confident, secular national group, the New Jew. And Hebrews were the indigenous inhabitants of Canaan, according to the first prime minister of Israel, David Ben Gurion. After he settled in the region, he believed that not all Hebrews joined Jacob's family when they migrated to Egypt, and later birthed the generation of Hebrews that endured the Exodus. So they want to make this area very, call it, confusing. They want to confuse this issue and muddy up the waters to make it that you just give up. I just say give up and throw up my hands. I don't know who's a real Jewish person, who's Hebrew. The use of the label to justify the territory that we're connected to, they're connected to children of God. That's a big stretch. And the DNA, I'll show you the label today is no longer Hebrew, but the main persons who occupy the land are what is called the Ashkenazi, and they are type R. You can see the results. So you have the deliberate muddying up the waters, deliberate confusion, deliberate just lack of clarity, total lack of clarity, to keep things just completely opaque. So neither black or white, just gray. They operate in the area of gray. And so it is. You have a lot of R's. Maternally, you would be a K, not a H, not an M, but a K, which is a hybrid. L would be a black woman, naturally. That's what we've been told, the L haplogroup. But you can see that genetically they are the Ashkenaz. And where is it from? Where is the label coming from? How old is it? I mean, just made up the other day. So as a Jewish diaspora, during the 10th century, but then we're in the 11th century today. The 10th century in Rhineland, West Germany, northern France, these were black places. As evidenced in part by the Moorish quadrille, these were black places. Crusades, which really never happened, 11th and 13th century. Persecution, 14th century. How could it be 14th century when again we're in the 11th century AD? Migrated to the Kingdom of Poland. And you have a black Polish king, Augustus Strong, and a Prince Jerzy, Dominik Lublinski, who is Polish and black in the year 1706 or 706. Casimir III the Great, he was a black king as well. Casimir III, and I did a deep dive on him. It said he reigned in 1333. Augustus the Strong was 1706. So Casimir III the Great of Poland would have been a brother as well, would be black. And today we have 5.7 million to 6.75 million of these Ashkenaz in the US. In Israel, we have 3.2 to 3.75. In Canada, we have 350,000. In UK, we have 273,000. And are they simply Zionists? We're seeing the label, Ashkenaz, the first son of Gomer, son of Japhet, son of Noah. But Noah's sons were all black. Noah himself is black. The book of Enoch is a fraud. So what are we talking about? The color was pretty straightforward. We had black people. Noah waited 500 years to find a wife. And so the color would be black, straight. So these are all made up labels. History and where? What time? In the 1st and 2nd century BCE? 1st and 2nd century. These are black people, the Romans, everyone back then. How are you going to have these paintings of 16th century? And see, you're showing them as it painted by clear-skinned, fair-skinned people who supposedly lived in Europe. But Europe was black, and they keep making it up. In Roman time, Constantinople, 380. Again, black times. In Athens, 267, 396. These were black periods. Black people. All black. So the Ashkenaz label is a fraud, and I would challenge anyone on that. It's a complete fraud. Let's go to another label. On the rise of Nazi Germany, I mean, we looked at the color of God. We looked at the supposed color or race of Satan, which skin hanging and swaying. That's not how brothers roll. So yeah, saggy skin, hands, and face. We see the descriptions of God. We see the descriptions of Satan. That's given by Ellen White. We see the labels of Ashkenaz, of Hebrew, and Hebrews were black people living in Roman times. So Aryans. Where did this label come from? Borrowed from Sanskrit, Indo-Iranians. And remember I said that the evolution scientists was supposed that mankind existed and came from animals. And then one branch was black and went to Africa. They were just beating on drums and doing that thing. And then the other group went through as Meso as Indians, and then from the haplogroup O, which is assigned to Indians, then they became white because of climatic conditions, and so the O changed to R. And I say to any scientist that this hocus pocus and nonsense. They can try to pull wool over your eyes and say, well, the haplogroup E's, which would be the most populous, really the most popular haplogroup, the one that I belong to, and the haplogroup of Mandela, of Hitler, of Napoleon, of President Wilson, of Einstein, of the Wright brothers, haplogroup of all the kings of Egypt. I mean, so it's Vladimir Putin is a E. So the haplogroup E should really be A, because A comes from E, which again doesn't even make sense. I don't know why they don't change this classification. It's nonsense. And these are scientists from top schools, and that's their field. This is not my field. But you have enough, as I say in the Caribbean, mama sense, enough common sense to just deduce that something is wrong with their flow genetic tree. Doesn't make sense. So you have A coming from E, and then B, C, D, and that's original black man, when the letter category E should really be A. But again, they muddy the waters, and they want to confuse and keep you guessing. This is a guessing game for them. Areas of gray, shades of gray, not black, not white. So they made they made A, E, and so it's E, A, B, C, D. And then on the other hand, you have those that descend from the cabbage babies. You have R and you have O. In men, an M and H in woman. And we saw from the Ashkenaz label that pretty much all of them would be R, and there would be maternal female K, which is a hybrid, because on one end you have A, B, C, D, E in men and L in women. That's the original black mankind up to just 200 years ago. And then on the polar end, you have the cabbage babies, you have the clones, you have R and O, and you have in men an M and H in women, and everyone else in the middle. So you have here a descendant. And the problem with this classification is the black Aboriginal men of Australia, they come from R. So Aryan, a name that's assigned to Indo-Iranians and Indian people, it's the haplogroup O, and R comes from O. But what about S? S is assigned to the black Aboriginal people. Again, that doesn't make any sense. How are you going to get a black-looking man, albeit straight here, but a black man coming from a white person, from an R? And that doesn't make any sense. But I'll just listen and just go through it. That this is the label that was assigned. In Nazi Germany, they were looking for Caucasian, right? So you have, in 1850s, a French diplomat and writer called Arthur de Gobineau. He brought the idea of the Aryan race, Proto-Indo-Europeans, superior specimens of humans, and their descendants comprise either a distinct racial group or a distinct subgroup of the hypothetical Caucasian race. The work of his latter followers, British-German philosopher Houston Stewart Chamberlain, Gobineau's theory proved to be particularly popular among European racial supremacists, ultimately foundation for Nazi racial theories. And we know that just ended poorly because the likes of Jesse Owens in the Olympics 1936, he won 5 goals. How can you have a subhuman, substandard man beating up everybody in Nazi Germany? And this chap called Arthur de Gobineau, let's check him out. As he was he came up with that label. And we have here this gentleman that you can see here, could go through it. Okay, Arthur was born in 1816. Oh, that's making the cut. So the theory of the master race. Okay, typical white good dude. And his father was Louis, 1784. That's really suspect. But mind you, the family lived in modern day Haiti, French. And as I said, the French are noble stock. The French, the Haiti was the pearl of the Antilles, the pearl of the Caribbean. We have to make sense, put one and one together to make two here, right? And this is the place that housed a lot of black royals from France. The Frankish Empire was very powerful. Then they didn't have to be such great nobles, but they were nobles nonetheless. And a lot of French, black French, went into Africa. And that's how you see Cote d'Ivoire, you have Burkina Faso, we have parts of Cameroon, we have Central African Republic, we have the northern part of Africa. Those colonized places, they speak the French mother tongue language. And some parts will speak Dutch. It's in South Africa, and in Angola, the Portuguese, and the Italians also had a section for themselves. English also was prevalent, Kenya and in the southern part of Africa. Nonetheless, these are people who came there, were brought there, ran away, and went to Africa because there was ethnic cleansing in Europe. Once the cabbage babies, rolled off the line, they had to present a white Europe just 200 years ago. So this person, he lived, and the family lived in Haiti. That's interesting. Now let's take a little bit of a deeper dive into this guy's background. We found him on the ancestry site. So yes, born in 1816, he was a diplomat, a poet, sculptor, anthropologist, died in Italy, but the family spent time in Haiti. So let's look at his father, Louis, French would say, French military person, but absolutely no picture or no portrait. You couldn't say picture because this was now the early 1800s. Let's remind ourselves, mid-1800s, where commercial photography became available. But did you know that there's a familial relationship with another important figure Let me share that now. Now, this famous person needs no introduction. Alexandre Dumas. It's not Dumas, Dumas. And he wrote a number of famous novels, Three Musketeers, The Count of Monte Cristo, born 1802. Okay. And he was born in France. And he was declared to be a black person, right? I mean, black, they could not hide that. There's certain things in history they can't erase. And these guys, Arthur and Alexandre, were cousins. So we have here Count Joseph Arthur Gobineau, and his family is connected to the Dumas. We can see here we have Louise Dumas, Theobald, Jacques, Count Louis Dumas, going back to 1669, and these were all black French nobles. All of them. We have here Alexander's father, Thomas Alexander, and Thomas Alexander was Alexandre's father. We could see that his mother was Marie, and they claim that she was from Gabon. Her father, they said, was nobody, but black people back then, those were their names. She was a Dumas. So I connected her with the Dumas family. And her husband was another Alexandre Pelletieri. Now, what his stock was, it goes back pretty far. So he was also black. So this is the stuff that they tell you. I mean, certainly, this man who came up with the Aryan label was himself black. And I wanted to cover something else, right? Because it's no surprise that to bolster the whole argument of Aryan, I just showed you this Arthur guy is black, related to Alexandre Dumas, the author of these famous novels, who himself was really black and French. And this Arthur guy lived in Haiti, a place where black nobles came from France. The pieces, they must make sense when you think about it. So the story goes that Hitler wanted to find some evidence to show his theory, show off theory about their powerful, strong Aryan race. It's made up label. Ashkenaz, the Levant, the labels they give you. It's all nonsense. I mean, it can't be proven by any measure. And just fraudulent, corrupt academics really further those interests, and they cannot comment or say anything really about it. They're mostly frauds. So here it is. You have this book, Germania. Now, Hitler found this book in the home of an Italian noble. And let me go. This is Germania, the book that backs up the story and written by Tacitus. Oh, that was a clip by the Book of Clarence. I love that movie. Black Christ. So here it is. Where was it found? It was Tacitus. It was written by Tacitus. But where was it found? And what it says, Tacitus, and I'll come to him in a minute. Physically, the Germanic people appear to be a distinct nation, admixture of their neighbors, wants to migrate, climate, horrid as Germania, blue eyes, reddish hair, large bodies, vigorous, labor tolerant of hunger and cold. So, really. Now, this book was found in reception and mixed views, but the authenticity, where was it found? It was found in the home of an Italian noble during World War II. And they said written by Tacitus. So who was Tacitus? He was a Roman, he was a scholar, and Tacitus had many books, but most have not survived, so they say. So it says here about his works. So he supposedly wrote Germania, and the surviving portions of those annals focus on the regions Tiberius, Claudius, Nero. More than 20 books of Tacitus never survived, but they found the one book that described the beautiful, the blue-eyed, the reddish-hair people of Germania. And this Tacitus was a man who, this sculpture of Tacitus, they only erected this about 100+ years ago. It's showing up somewhere in Austria. It's a complete fabrication. So he's a guy who lived in the 1st century. He was born in AD 56. He died in the year 120. And he observed the building of Hadrian's Wall and the fighting with the Picts, the black Picts. Yeah, the black Picts. They may have been tattooed, but they were black. and the Romans were black. And this guy Tacitus, who was a lawyer and historian, was also black. But he was the one who wrote Germania. And yet, most of the works of Tacitus are not found. They're probably in hiding somewhere, but not made public. It's just heavily spurious. And this is what we're led to believe. Now, I wanted to present something, and I will have to be brief, about it, because I know I'm running out of time. As we dissect, again, I want to make it clear. Here it is that we're talking about the image of God, right? We're talking about the image of God. Image of God, the image of God, and what is a man being made in his image. And I cannot get away from that point. This is the whole reason why I'm putting together this episode. So how do you reconcile all these things? The labels of Ashkenaz, of the Hebrew labels, it's distorted today, means literally nothing, because the Hebrews of antiquity, the Hebrews of the Bible, are not those living in the Middle East today. And the labels of Ashkenaz and the DNA, which is clearly R, which is cabbage baby DNA, and they admit it. So how do you reconcile all those labels? Ashkenaz, Hebrew, Aryan, which is made up Indo-Iranian, and Indians, where the haplogroups again make no sense. The O's, the R's coming from the O's, and then the black Aboriginal S's coming from the R's, as they tell you what history is. So I want to just, dive into something, present. We know we have a lot of statues and images. The last episode in 15, I presented Tartaria, and it's Black Tartaria, where we had evolved societies with the knowledge and free energy and frequencies that healed. And they were the ones that cloned and started cloning. So is it really possible then that they had this knowledge? I mean, we know today that we have chimeras. Yes, I posted this on Facebook. We have a literal pig and human mixing. And we know the pig is the closest animal to a human, not a monkey, not a gorilla, but a pig. But they actually today, they have had this technology, and they boast about chimeras, and they are able. So what is a cabbage baby? Is a cabbage baby a form of chimera? I let you decide. But they have had this technology. But what freaked me out was when you look at the kind of artistry, look at what they have achieved. I was blown away when I started really looking deeply at these monuments. And we can't have it. They're not reproduced and able to be reproduced today. But I just want to show some of these things, and then I'll comment later.
It reveals her facial features, as if the fabric were made of silk or gauze, although it is solid marble. This effect gives the impression of a gradation between concealment and clarity, which gives the statue a beauty and mystery that captivates the viewer and arouses curiosity about the sculptor's skill in highlighting transparency in a medium as solid as stone.
And more on this, I wanted to show you something else.
I didn't start this investigation believing marble could be moulded like clay. That's absurd. Everyone knows marble is carved, chiseled, beaten into submission by patient hands over months or years. Michelangelo himself supposedly spent 4 years on David. The narrative is settled, documented, taught in every art history course across the world. But then I look closer at the veins, not the marble veins, the human ones, the bulging, anatomically perfect veins of stone. The translucent draping reveals the body beneath, the fingers of sinking into flesh as if the marble were actual flesh, the lace veils carved from a single block yet appearing weightless, gossamer, impossible. Ask yourself, how do you carve negative space beneath a surface? How do you create the illusion of depth in a material that has no give, no flexibility, no margin for error? How do you make solid stone appear transparent? You make one mistake with a chisel, one miscalculation, and the entire sculpture is ruined. The vein becomes a groove, the illusion shatters, yet we see no hesitation, no correction, no evidence of trial and error, just perfection. Anatomical, medical, impossible perfection. And that's where the official explanation begins to collapse. I started cataloguing examples, not selectively, not cherry-picking, but systematically. What I found wasn't occasional brilliance or rare genius. I found a pattern that spanned continents and centuries, a consistency that shouldn't exist if we're talking about individual artists working independently with hammers and chisels. Bernini's statue of Proserpina. Look at Pluto's fingers pressing into Proserpina's marble thigh, not resting on the surface, pressing into it. The flesh dimples, it compresses. It behaves exactly as soft tissue behaves under pressure. The marble appears to yield, to deform, to respond to force the way living flesh responds. How? How do you carve displacement? How do you calculate the exact geometry of compressed tissue and then reproduce it in an unforgiving medium that allows no revision? One wrong tap and you've removed too much material. The dimple becomes a crater. The illusion fails, but it doesn't fail. Not in Proserpina, not in Apollo and Daphne, where Bernini transforms marble into bark mid-metamorphosis, where you can see individual leaves emerging from fingertips with botanical accuracy. Not in the veiled Christ in Naples, where marble becomes fabric so convincing that visitors instinctively reach out to lift the veil. The veiled Christ. That's where the mystery becomes impossible to ignore. Giuseppe San Martino carved, or allegedly carved, the veiled Christ in 1753. The sculpture depicts Christ's body covered by a translucent shroud. Except the shroud isn't separate. It's part of the same block of marble as the body beneath, one continuous piece. And yet, you can see Christ's face through the veil, not suggested, not implied, visible. The nose, the closed eyes, the parted lips. The fabric clings to the contours of the body with gravitational accuracy, draping over the chest, pooling in the hollow of the throat, pulling taut across the knees. The folds obey physics. The transparency varies depending on thickness. Where the fabric bunches, it becomes opaque. Where it stretches thin, the body shows through. This raises a simple but critical question. How do you carve through something that doesn't exist? The veil isn't real. It's solid marble pretending to be gossamer fabric. To create the illusion of seeing through it, you need to calculate not just the surface of the veil, but the surface of the body beneath the sea of clay. Explorer Hiram Bingham, who rediscovered Machu Picchu, heard the same accounts from indigenous sources. In 1983, a Catholic priest claimed he'd successfully softened stones using plant extracts but couldn't resolve the rehardening problem. The plant's name surfaces repeatedly. Jocha, Pito, scientifically classified as Ephedra andina. Researchers Jan Peter de Jong, Christopher Jordan and Jesus Gamarra examined Cusco's granite walls and found evidence of vitrification, surfaces heated to extreme temperatures and turned glassy. Engineer Christopher Dunn analysed Egyptian monuments and documented precision that modern tools...
You learn something every day. So the Tartarian Empire, we are told and shown so many marble figures. And how could they produce that level of accuracy and details with leaves and with even, they said, imprint of hands and fingers into a thigh? Remarkable stuff that cannot be done today, even with our lasers and sophisticated tools. So there are plants. There are plants that they could use, they extract from plants unheated under certain conditions. And when they examined the marble, in all these cases, they found biological plant matter fused and mixed in with stone. Doesn't again make sense. I mean, you have marble, rock, but what about these organic compounds? And it was done in different stages and phases. So why the allure? Why the representation that looks like Caucasian figures of the David, of these other images that are depicting people who are Caucasian? How do you reconcile it with the record and portraying about all black figures? But it is that over time, these black societies were creating images of their gods. And we know that throughout time, Satan has been very active to enhance the civilizations of the Egyptians, of the Antediluvians, of the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, even modern day Europe And before the reset, he's been working and enhancing the civilization, sharing technology. And so the deities that's presented to the ruling parties, the nobles, the kings, they're black. They're all black people, but they have been worshiping idols, worshiping and fashioning images of their so-called deities. And that makes sense. And then they would have images and sculptures of a Christ, which is really false, but they fashion it with the white appearance and features, which suggests that Satan is. And I know it's a very delicate topic. Nobody wants to be associated with the devil or with Satan. But what they have done over the last 200 years was to demean, destroy the image of Christ, portray blacks as savages, as evil, as wicked, as, just the dregs of society, as less than in every way, from Jim Crow to all the caricatures and the demeaning photos and the watermelon and the exaggerated features and noses they've been doing. To what end? So you have an exalted, elevated society. And I wanted to present another piece, but I will have to deal with it in another session. I don't think I'll be able to cover this, but the subject of Antarctica and what was discovered. Let me jump in and show that right now.
Antarctica is a land of extremes. Nearly 98% of the ground is covered by an ice sheet up to 3 miles thick. A mountain as towering as Japan's Mount Fuji at 12,400 feet would not even break the surface. Temperatures regularly fall below minus 50 degrees Fahrenheit with winds of up to 200 miles an hour. During its peak season, it is home to only 4,000 scientists and military personnel.
Antarctica is the last frontier. It holds our imagination. Old maps that said, "Here be monsters." The last remaining territory on the planet that could have such a designation is Antarctica.
Although it was discovered nearly 250 years ago, scientists have more questions than answers when it comes to this frozen continent. Due to the sheer depth of the ice covering its landmass, the surface of Antarctica is unable to be seen with the naked eye. And ancient
did that. He discovered that as he flew over the pole, suddenly frightening.
In his diary, which was discovered by his son after his death, Admiral Byrd tells an extraordinary story.
Admiral Byrd heard there was an entrance to the center of the Earth through the South Pole. And he took planes into the South, under the South Pole. And when he did that, he discovered that as he flew over the pole, suddenly he's looking at things that shouldn't be there. I mean, it was temperate. His squadron flew under the Earth, into the Earth.
It turns into this lush and green area, and he can't even believe his eyes. But that's just the beginning of his extraordinary story. He tells how all of a sudden he starts to see a shimmering rainbow city that's made of crystal. His airplane is taken control of when he suddenly sees these flying disc-shaped objects around them that lead him to the ground. Whereupon he's escorted into a cavernous type of an area where he meets a being he refers to as the Master in his diary. The Master tells him that they're highly disappointed in what humans are doing with nuclear weapons, and how they've recently destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and they really are concerned about what is going on the surface of the planet. They tell Admiral Byrd that they hope that humanity will ultimately stop this.
For UFO researchers, this account from Admiral Byrd's diary is particularly significant due to the fact that the modern UFO era began right after World War II and the detonation of the first atomic bombs. It has also been noted that a high number of UFO sightings have been reported in the vicinity of nuclear missile silos.
Admiral Byrd's story is congruent with the stories that we hear from numerous accounts of angelic or extraterrestrial type beings that are very concerned about what humanity is doing with nuclear weapons. Just ask the Air Force officers at the U.S. missile silos.
What does all of this have to do with the image of God? Let's just go back to the book of Genesis, because this is just a recap and a summary. And it says, and so God created man in his own image, and in the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. There's God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. The Trinity, but different personalities, but God in his image. But to understand the fullness of that chapter, we have to look at chapter 2. And it says, God, in chapter 2 of Genesis, verse 7, and the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. And so again, it's clear, even here in Poland, where I am, the natural color of the ground is this dark, rich brown color, black, sometimes looking rich soil, and that's the natural color. And you say, well, back then in Jamaica, too, the bauxite is rich in deposits. We have red clay earth, and I've been to Burkina Faso, and some of that ground, and Niger ground is just red, clay-like. So we know that this world has been ravaged, abused and pillaged. This earth was mostly affected by the cataclysmic flood, and that flood occurred in BC 2400. There was a major flood that ripped apart the world, and they speak about continental drifts. No. They describe that land mass as Pangea in some persons, James W. Lee and some others. They say it's Pangea. Whatever it was a uniform world that was split apart by the flood, roughly 2400 BC. So over 3,500 years ago, because we are now in the 11th century, not the 21st, because again, the Gregorian calendar was not just a calendar of changing and then the 13th month and missing. It's 1,000 years being added to our timeline from 582 to 1582 overnight. And the Bible does refer to the beast power, the powers that be, changing time and laws. And we know they change laws. They worship on Sunday, not Saturday. They worship on a different day of the week. They also, we should be adopting a 13-month cycle and not 12 months based on how the world works and the tides. We should be looking at just a 30-day, it's 28 days, a 30-day cycle, but they have 31 and 30, and then February with 28 and 29 days. It's also confusing, but deliberately confusing us so that we just don't keep track of the time. And in the case of the labels that I shared with you, we lose sight of this image of ourselves as reflecting the divine. So it's clear that man being formed on the dust of the ground. And one other point I just wanted to make too is that we notice that in a lot of the visitations by these spirit beings over time, they influence architecture in different parts. Some people say even the Nile. We'll look at sedimentary and fossils, that the Nile and Mississippi or even the Grand Canyon would share some, material, like in Africa, in Egypt. If you combine that world in the Pangea sense and then rip it apart delicately, not over time, not over millions of years, but violently over a just moment, one day, a moment that it just ripped apart. That's what happened with the flood. So it is that you could see maybe even temples and things that are are mimicking other parts of the world. To just say, well, this doesn't make sense. But we look at ground itself, the earth, why there are gaping holes, obviously, in the earth today. And that did not exist. And why the color is different. Some parts we have the deserts, but then in the case of the Middle East too, the deserts, you have a desert area, but very rich substance oil and resources underground. So the earth has changed, but the natural color of earth, natural color of topsoil. And you can ask any average geologist, would be a dark brown, black color. And the text in Genesis goes on further and talking about the creation of woman. And so the first woman, not this Lilith or other being that has come about, it's Eve. And they want to make it seem that Lilith was the mother of the black race. And that's spurious and that's devil speak. But that has nothing to do with the Bible. But in the book of Genesis, it says that the Lord caused a deep sleep to fall on Adam, and he took out one of the ribs, closed the flesh, and the rib that the Lord had taken from man, he made a woman and brought her to the man. And Adam said, this is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh, and she'll be called woman. She was taken out of a man. Therefore shall a man leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, and they shall be one flesh. And this is the act where the mankind, or the woman, and it's just very, very clear. It didn't even say human, man, and mankind, which are the labels that I really would like to refer to even as the original man, rather than, again, we add these labels, like we mentioned, where the Aryans coming from, or the Indo-Iranians, and the Meso-Indians, and those whites that derive their existence from some common ancestor, some Indian. And it's just making it up as you go along. And the labels that the Bible have given about the Hebrews and those who follow the covenants of God and were original black people for just millennia and centuries, that those labels are twisted. Well, we look at some Ashkenaz from Gomer and from Japheth. Japheth was black. Noah was black. The patriarchs and the people in the Bible, including Christ himself, were melanated black people. The Romans were black. When you look at the royal castle in Wales and the basement, which I saw and I observed, they're black. When you look at the images in Tunisia, Algeria, and North Africa, those images definitely show and exhibit black faces. 3,000, but the noses and the faces have been wiped off and erased. Even castles here in Poland, even, relics in Scandinavia, in Estonia, why the faces are removed. But then what survives would be the marble, beautiful, magnificent marble statues of certain gods. And these obviously were the gods worshipped by the kings. These same kings, they were black looking. The stories of even Elizabeth I, I believe, in her time in England, a black woman, but wanted to paint her face. Some people said she had a skin condition, but she was painting her face to look more white. But this is fascination. This was a growing fascination because as these kings were visited, and there was a sharing of knowledge. There was sharing and enhancement of knowledge. How did the Antediluvians build those magnificent temples and cities? And we know that those cities and temples were built in such grand scale, and they were experimenting, doing cloning from before the flood. And that's how and why God had to destroy the world, because of these aberrations, of these clones, and using maybe the pig DNA. Pig is the closest creature to man, and forming these chimeras. And you can see that man has changed and morphed, but some of that residual DNA stuck with us for centuries. And it explains how the wild man, the hairy creature in the Caucasus caves and mountains that was hunted, that people used the skin for clothes and shoes and books, to bind books. Those feral, hairy creatures referred to as wild men would have been as a result of the residual DNA and the cloning from the pre-flood, from the 22,500 BC, 2,600 BC, before the flood would have wiped away the giants, a lot of those mixed hybrids. Some of that came through. And today, even before the reset, this painting again is so important because it represents a very important, a pivotal moment in time. These kings were operating at a high level. They had technologies. So technology was shared from the Antediluvian stage. We're talking BC 3000. Then, we to about 2400 till it end. That empire came to an end at the flood, 2400 BC. Then we have the Egyptians. They had technology beyond. Moving massive blocks. How do you do that? That was from the cutting off point, the Exodus, of the black Hebrews and Israelites from Egypt in 1500 BC to around 2000 BC. After Nimrod passed, we had 500 years of prosperity and greatness and grand splendor of the Egyptians. So whoever was visiting them and sharing knowledge appeared obviously in a kind of Caucasian, face and way, and they were glorified. But, people were, and if you find relics of people and deities that looked even white amongst the hieroglyphics, they're not necessarily, yes, you had blacks and you had some erasure. They have evidence of erasure of the relics, but anyone who looked even fair, they were visited constantly by persons who appeared white looking. It's obvious. I mean, the story of Admiral Byrd, of the master who appeared to him in his account. And he's a decorated military man, and he went to Antarctica and he saw the crystal city and he saw a light. Again, everything is lightened. Lucifer, the enlightened one. Masons they're encouraged to follow the light. The light is everything about light. He was a light bearer, the choir director, and for his features of skin that's hanging. He said, black don't crack. I don't know, there's a saying, expression going, we maintain. I'm turning 51 this year. I'm mixed race, proud of my mixed race heritage, but I'm also embracing the black side, which my father being 80 years old, he looks like he's probably 60s. The ability to preserve, interact with the world, conduct electricity. We're okay with the sun. We're naturally, of course, creatures, belongers of this planet. We're here as original man. But the features and faces and the way they say the skin sags, the lack of collagen, that to me, when Ellen White described Satan or Shaitan, it would, appear as someone who lacks melanin, obviously, skin hanging loosely from his hands. That just doesn't happen with very many brothers. Just doesn't. And it's not a racist comment, but it's something that I've observed personally in my whole lifetime on this planet. This is it, that we are confronted with images, and words do matter. So when it says that God made man from the ground and from the dust, and made in his image after his likeness, the pastors and stuff, again, in those churches, noon on Sunday is the most segregated hour on the planet, the white church and the black church. Who are we worshiping? The Ethiopians, as people look down and say, oh, we're backward. Ethiopians are using a full Bible, 100 books. And we know that the Bible given to James, King James, I call him Brother James, because he was black and a king of England in 1611, or rather 611. Then was a melanated king. He gave us the full Bible of 100 books. But for whatever reason, 200 years ago, they couldn't print it. A lot of the books got taken out. And in Esdras, it also refers to race, and that the people who came from Adam, some of them are not even worth spittle because they are diminished. And it says it in Esdras, but it was taken out. And there are many references that are there that goes to imagery, color. And in the Bible, it makes clear about the ground comment. So we just can't, it didn't say that, what did it say? It said from the ground, from the earth, from the ground, from the dust. It's where man came from. And we have to stick to that. And the other thing that people were suggesting in some of the literature, Guy Anderson, I was speaking to him this week, is the Anunnaki. So the beings that we're visiting, the beings whose likeness are shaped, and in the marble, they were deities and people like aliens. And why would an alien travel thousands of miles to come to Earth in a tin saucer just to say hello? And again, that doesn't make any sense. That doesn't make any kind of sense for some alien to come. So they would announce that all the Anunnaki, these beings, created man, a black man, white man. No, it's us. We are the doers. We are the custodians of the planet. And we messed up. We are the ones who created those, call it cabbage meadow babies. We did that 200 years ago. We were the ones that were being influenced by these beings, these visitors, these masters that came. Satan, his fallen angels will appear in that enlightened form as Caucasian, white-looking beings, because they would be different, of course. And if they're captured in the architecture and the hieroglyphics, they're not the gotcha moment, like, oh, that's how the people looked like. So we had a black planet. And so the visitation and the visitors would have come through Antediluvian period, 3000 BC to around 2400 BC, when that civilization stopped. They would have visited, and that was moment number one. And then the period number two would be the period of the heightened Egyptian civilization, Samaria, Egypt, around 2000 BC to around 1500 BC, when the black children of Israel, they left Egypt, and the Egyptians were black themselves, but they fantasized and they glorified whichever masters came. So there were images clearly of black people in the hieroglyphics, scrubbed, but you also had some white appearing that is today that people glorify and say, well, gotcha, the people were white. No, those were painted deities that appeared to the black population, the populace. The third moment in time is not really the ruling of Israel, because Israel was a mighty ruling power. Black Israel during the time of David and Solomon, that was about 1100, 1000 BC. So I wouldn't count that. But the other moment in time would be, because there you had a black ruler, God ruling his people. But the other moment in time would be the Babylonians. That is modern day Iraq. Here it is that they were inspired. So if you see images that look like the Caucasian, we know we have winged bird and man sort of looking creatures that were popular in that era. They would have the sort of features, different, call it chimeras, different chimeras that they would display. The famous one with a bearded man and wings and body of a beast or lion, but they would have wings. That's the famous icon of Babylon, and shared by the Persians. With Babylon, another civilization enhanced by these visitors, by these others, the devil and his fallen angels. Persia, modern day Iran, which was then around 500s, 400s BC. And next would be Greece, Alexander the Great, who was a black person, and his generals and that society, even though they lived in ancient Greece, which today you see the marbles, you see the images of Apollo and Poseidon and all these Diana and different gods and Hera. They were painted on sculptured to form, to not represent the people, but the gods, and who appeared to them, not aliens, not Anunnaki, but fallen angels and Satan himself, who would appear as an enlightened being to those people living. And next would be Rome, from 150 BC over to 476 AD when they fell. And that period glorified these, call it white gods that would appear. So again, if you see some icon that is white looking in appearance and it's a Roman statue images, well, the technology to soften the marble was available. The plants were certainly available to soften marble and to fashion in that way that we can't even duplicate and replicate it today. So they were yearning for their gods, but again, they were black people. And then after the fall of Rome, and we had a quick progression to a Tartarian society. That's these brothers too, behind me. And they were worshiping, again, false idols. And a lot of the production, I feel a lot of the production of the statues were done during this Tartarian period. And then it ended in the late 1700s. We know we had the American Revolution. A black Washington, George Washington, was black, described as a Huguenot, fighting George III. George III, I showed another episode on the 1792 Barbados penny, the head of a black man. So black man fighting black man. 1776, we're celebrating 250 years even today of American independence from a black Britain, and then moving to the French Revolution and the fallout there in the 1790s. We know they have not announced the DNA of Louis XVI, but we know Napoleon, who was emperor, is a haplogroup E. Now, how do you place Napoleon described in books as a black person with a haplogroup E, my haplo, as a black man, E being the first haplo? He was the emperor of France, black Napoleon. And so how does that fit in the models of their history? And we know from that point, that was the shakeup. That was the big reset. Tartaria fell, and they then advanced the clones. The clones today that mixed chimeras, cabbage babies, we know they own most of the wealth. And we're beholden to the story. Oh, the colonizers are back. They're bad. They're wicked. They're recolonizing Africa. And we need to give them everything because they were the ones who gave us the technology. Well, the gods, God shaped man in his image, and they call it Antichrist, the anti-God. Let me just use the word because Antichrist is used as something that's coming, and we will have a deception. I always say that it must be a brother. They have run out of cards. The people who run the world will have to just announce this history, but they will try to put it into their own narrative and then maybe make some kind of, allusion and reference to an alien being, but not God, but created the man, and the black man was created. However they do it, but beware of the alien delusion coming and then they announcing it. But I think the Antichrist, which is not going to be the real Christ, is going to be how to be a brother, because this whole white narrative is falling away. It is cracking away as marble cracks, as marble disintegrates. So this whole narrative about their history, it's been announced for hundreds and even 1,000 years of the white deities. And so the technology that was really shared was coming from fallen angels. So granted, but blacks still had their hands in the technology and making things, in contributing to what we enjoy and use today, what counts as modern convenience. So it was not those beings themselves, because all cabbage babies, there is not any history. In fact, physically, biologically, did they even have a navel? They were not living long. I mean, gestation cycle 1 month. They had to be protected in cages. They had baby cages. They transported in cages, as announced by people like Guy Anderson and others who talk and know about the schematics and the transportation and logistics to ship cabbage babies. And so they had this very delicate start, had to be even suckled by a lot of black women. And we noticed the nursing took place. A lot of that happened during the 200, they said 300 years ago. But it wasn't during slavery, because the whole transatlantic slave trade story is under question. You're not going to need to transport a whole lot of blacks to the New World if the New World was already black. So, and it doesn't explain the languages. We don't speak African anywhere, but we speak French and Portuguese in Africa. We speak a Dutch language in Africa. We in the Caribbean, all sorts of manner of European languages spoken. So this is the justification to award call it non-black, the white population, 90% of the wealth. And how would you describe it? Again, 58 million millionaires, and barely 2 or 3% would be black. Yet we had a black planet just about 250 years ago. We had a black planet, and you can't easily reconcile the wealth transfers, staggering. And a lot of people like the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the JP Morgans, the Vanderbilts, the Carnegies, all these families just simply got. They acquired, they got what was not even theirs, and the government awarded these rights and contracts and riches that were bestowed upon families with no real pedigree, made up surnames, no real history. And I've been tracking through GTR that a lot of the families, some of them do have and might have, if you look at DNA testing, if they're E or A or BC, a lot of the powerful people today, even the Rothschilds, they have E DNA. So they are black persons, not looking black, but have black fathers. So there is some connection in a lot of the cases of very, very elite, high up. The Conti family is another one from Italy. So there is that connection between the families, rich families, and say the original man, where they were just passing it on to their offspring, essentially, rather than giving it away to a total clone. They are passing it on to their actual physical child. So then they would have a child with a woman who would be haplo H or M, a clone, and they would then be able to pass on the wealth, pass it on. So it is that this whole thing with being made in the image of God. We need to study this. We need to apply it. We need to respect the clear words, even in the Torah, the Old Testament is respected. And I cannot see the justification to have and support the symbol of white Jesus and white Bible characters. And those are then images that were used as the gods, as the anti-gods and anti-God, but the gods and anti-God really of the civilizations that came before us. And it's a physical act. This whole act, very physical and personal, to mold, to make, to fashion these statues, which we marvel at today. That took so much time and effort to do that. And it's in contrast to this kind of work. It's even one way similar, but also contrasting, but also similar to the way in which God worked to create the man. We have black original man. So let that sink in and bake in, that we are created as black people, something to be proud of in the image of our God. And we need to take down those false images. Worship God in spirit and truth. It's each person's journey. Are you going to worship a false God? Again, in the commandments, it says, do not make any graven image. And for rightfully so. But if the images are there that are false and you're worshiping it, who are you worshiping? Who are you praying to? It's a personal decision. It's a personal journey. I cannot speak for anyone else other than just myself. But let us worship the true God, the true melanated black God in spirit and in truth. For that, I thank you. Have a good morning, good evening, good night, wherever you are. This is episode 16 in the image of God.